Hey guys, this is Raz, and I wanted to give you all a quick heads up before we start my interview with Dan Tripp about an important free course that we're releasing here in about a week. If you want to get it for free, you need to go to mycampaigncoach.com and sign up for our free email list. We send out weekly emails with all kinds of content and free tips and information about how you can run your campaign and win. But this course in particular is going to be focused on answering the question of should you run for office and can you win? We go deep on this list. We put a lot of time into it and got a lot of feedback from candidates as well as consultants. And we've come up with a lot of questions that candidates need to answer but often don't think to ask before they run for office. We put together a great PDF document that has all this information with blanks for you to write out, and we're going to email that for free to anybody that signed up for our email list. I hope you'll sign up, and let's get to the podcast.
This is the My Campaign Coach podcast, where we talk about how to win elections. Every week, we let you hear straight from the best consultants, operatives, and candidates in the game, all for one reason, to help you win. For more information about how we can help you win, visit mycampaigncoach.com. Now, here's your host, Raj Schaefer.
Welcome to the How to Run for Office podcast from My Campaign Coach. We appreciate Campaign Sidekick supporting us, and I hope that you'll visit campaignsidekick.vote to find out how their best-in-breed voter contact platform can revolutionize your campaign and help you win. Our guest this week has organized or managed campaigns and projects in 42 states, served on dozens of national, state, and local campaigns, and worked on 4 presidential campaigns plus a presidential super PAC. Dan Tripp is president of Ground Game Strategies Incorporated, a company that designs custom voter contact programs for data-driven political campaigns and issue advocacy projects. Prior to founding Ground Game Strategies, Dan served as a state representative in the South Carolina legislature, representing Greenville County for 12 years. He now lives in Malden, South Carolina, with his bride Alicia, and they're expecting their baby girl here in August. Dan and I connected while we were both working for the Cruz Presidential Super PAC during 2015 and 16, where Dan ran the South Carolina effort and helped plan and execute major events all across the country. We share a strong belief in the importance of ground game, and I'm excited he's willing to share some of his experiences both as a candidate and a consultant with us today. Dan, welcome to the podcast.
It's good to be here, Raz. Thanks for having me on.
It's always great talking to you. As I mentioned, we got to spend a fair amount of time together during the run-up to the South Carolina primary there during the 2016 Republican primary season, and that was all kinds of fun and craziness. And I really appreciated getting to learn from you and watch the great work of the team you put together. I just kind of wish the results had been different, but we did everything we could to impact it.
That's right. I was going to say I didn't like the results, but we sure had a fun time getting those results.
Well, that's the downside of campaigns, and we can exercise some influence, but at the end of the day, the results are not always up to us. Right. But we did what we could, and I'm pretty proud of the work you guys did.
It was good working with you and your team as well.
Well, I enjoyed it. As we're getting started, I definitely want to spend quite a bit of time on your ground game experience and your time as a candidate, because you bring a pretty unique perspective as somebody that's been a candidate, an elected official, and also worked heavily on the consulting side. But let's start out by kind of where the story started and kind of fill me in on how you got involved in politics and kind of what started you on this crazy journey.
I got bitten with the political bug. I remember the day as clear as it was yesterday. Back in 1986, I was headed to a small town parade in South Carolina, Ellery, South Carolina. And as we were getting close to the town, we saw these cars that were pulled over on the side of the road. It was like this big entourage, and looked over, and it was the Republican candidate for governor, Carroll Campbell. He was a congressman at the time. And so we pulled in behind him and shook his hand and got to meet him and, spend a little time with him. And that's the first time I kind of got those jitters and, starstruck and told my friend that I wasn't going to wash my hand for a month because I was so excited to meet the next governor of the state. So that was when I first got bit with the political bug, and I was 16 at the time, and spent probably the next 5 or 6 years just working in campaigns and doing the grunt work, and, worked from city council races on up to congressional races. And then in 1994, about 8 years later, I decided I wanted to run for myself, and that's how the journey got started.
That's pretty cool. I mean, and it's a good span of time. You learned a lot about campaigns. I'm sure you got to interact with enough elected officials to learn a lot of the things that you liked or didn't like about how they ran their campaigns. What were some of those initial lessons as you were starting to look at your own candidacy that helped shape how you viewed what you wanted your campaign to look like?
I think there's two experiences that I had that were formative in my formative years that kind of helped me early on in the process. And one is business related and one is political related. When I was in college, I worked for a state house member in his reelection campaign, and I just did phone work. We did phone banks every night for him after school, and I remember being exhilarated getting on the phone and talking to people. And so, some people hate doing phones, but I just became this cold call monster, and I loved it. And so that
one
was
of the few.
That was kind of my entry level into politics. And then another thing that kind of that I learned from is when I first got out of college, I started selling insurance for MetLife up in Boston. And of course, I'm a Southern boy, and working in Boston, it was a culture shock, and they spoke funny up here, so I had to kind of learn how to speak funny to relate to them. But did a lot of door-to-door visitations for people on the insurance job, and so that was a skill set that I learned and honed, and it helped me tremendously when I first ran for office back in. I ran for city council outside of Boston in '91, and that's a whole nother story. But when I first ran for the House, the legislature down in South Carolina, that door-to-door experience really, really helped me, as I'm sure you can appreciate with all the canvassing work that you've done over the years.
Absolutely. And coming from the phone banking, I mean, as many of our listeners probably know, that's either one of those things you love or you hate, and there's very few people who love it. And it sounds like you got in the right situation, and just there's something weird in your brain where you loved that, and it worked out well.
I think one of the things I was struck with going through college, I took a speech class my freshman year in college, and I hated public speaking. I was nervous about getting up in front of people, but for some reason, I had a breakthrough in that class, and all of a sudden I learned about the principles of communicating with people. And when you connect with people on a verbal or nonverbal level, it's a real gratifying experience. And so, when you talk about talking to someone on the phone or talking to someone on their doorstep, if you're looking internally and saying, "Oh, I don't want to talk to these people," then of course it's going to be a negative experience. Mm-hmm. But if you look and say, how can I connect with this person? How can I communicate, have a two-way flow of communication, then that opens up a whole new dialogue that, is a gratifying experience.
Right.
So those were kind of, some of my formative years when I first got into politics.
That's an awesome way to get into it, especially because I think a lot of folks underappreciate the likeliness or the similarities between sales, especially the door-to-door variety that forces you into cold call or cold contact situations with the political side, because it takes a lot when you have somebody come to the door, whether you're selling them insurance or Bibles or a candidate. They have to assent to this contact. They open their door, but even after they open the door, you've got to do something to engage them, and they still have the opportunity to say no, as many of them do. And your ability to affect an outcome for the campaign and leave them with a positive interaction there in the back of their mind is it all comes down to your interpersonal communication abilities, and honestly has little to nothing to do with the script the campaign gives you. It's all on you.
Right. That's right. You have to be able to, down south we call it shuck and jive, but you've got to learn how to maneuver and do that two-step dance with the person you're talking to, and they give you feedback, you take that and you run with it. And it just, that two-way flow of communication is just an important part of politics, at the grassroots level and the candidate level.
it's one of those things where block walking or canvassing on its surface seems very simple. It's like go to a door, knock it, read them the script, and walk away. And that's a popular misconception, but I know that you do the same thing. When I find a canvasser that's really good, that can communicate, that can read the person they're talking to and figure out the best way to interact with them and how to get the information that we want and leave that positive message behind, that's somebody that I want to hang on to, and it's somebody that I'm definitely going to recommend highly if and when they get the opportunity to move to a higher, better paying or larger scope of work type job. It's
right.
Those are valuable people that you don't find all the time.
Sure. And, I'll also, dive into the candidate side of things too. When I first ran for the legislature, I was 23 at the time when I first started, and then I was 24 by the time I got elected. But I remember the Saturday before my primary, I got a call from a little old lady. I had no idea who she was, but she had gotten a postcard, and this postcard was from my opponent attacking me for being I didn't live in the district. I moved in so I could run for office, and, just the basic, political attacks that they do against a young person. And this lady started crying, and I'm like, wow, how did I evoke this emotion? She said, I really thought you were going to pull this thing off, but you're probably going to lose because of this. And long story short, I won 67% of the vote. But what I realized after that experience was, all those conversations that I had on the doorstep, whether they were 3 minutes or 10 minutes, that if you have good interpersonal skills with people, if you learn how to read people, if you learn how to, communicate with people, that 3 to 5 to 7 minute conversation, you're actually building a relationship with these folks that can help inoculate you from your opponent's attacks. The person that gets that postcard looks at it and says, the person in this postcard does not square with the person that I stood on their doorstep.
Right.
And so, it's a great tool for inoculating yourself from your opponent's attack. So that's kind of another angle of this that we could talk about.
Well, we had last week on the podcast Dr. Brian Bird, who is a friend of mine, and we recently helped elect him to the city council here in Fort Worth, Texas. And we saw that play heavily in his race. He personally knocked over 5,000 doors, which was pretty much every knockable door in the city council district,
right.
Among municipal voters. And he had thousands of conversations. And his opponents, they did a lot of, which the incumbent, his campaign, they did a lot of door knocking, but a whole lot of their negative campaign was through the mail. And negative mail honestly works a lot of the time. But because he'd had so many of these conversations with voters, they saw that dissonance. And when I was going out there to help with my teams to do the get out the vote and end of campaign persuasion, I was talking to all these people who they'd met Brian once for a couple minutes on the door, and they'd be like, I know Brian. It wasn't I met Brian one time. They felt like they knew him, and that inoculated him and insulated him from so much of the negativity in those mailers, and it made those people be even like the opponent less, because they were like, I feel like this guy's lying to me because I know Brian, and that's not the Brian I know. And it was a huge impact. And a lot of candidates, some can't, some won't when it comes to doing heavy block walking themselves. But that's an opportunity you have to get insulation against your later opponent's attacks that no other canvasser, no matter how good they are, can get for you, and that you can't pay anybody to get on your behalf through mail or radio or anything else.
That is absolutely true.
Now, before we get into even more of the details of really constructing a great ground game, talk to me a little bit more about what Ground Game Strategies does and how you're able to help campaigns, kind of what you guys do.
So when I left the legislature in 2006, I went to work for a group called Americans for Limited Government. And basically for 5 years, we did projects all over the country, from block walking and canvassing programs to field programs to, legislative, advocacy initiatives. And it was all geared towards, kind of pushing back against the left. And so gained a lot of practical experience from that to add to my legislative experience. And so in 2010, I decided to start my own company, Ground Game Strategies. And I wanted a company that was focused on, kind of ground level activities. You know this as well as I do. There's been this big rift in the Republican Party between the consultants that want to push TV advertising to the exclusion of everything else, and some people want to push mail, and I think all of it's kind of like that drill baby drill, all of the above strategies. Right. I think you need all of those strategies coordinated together, but I think you've got to have a campaign that starts from the ground up. And so that's why I started Ground Game Strategies. And, we've been fortunate. We've done, small projects and big projects all over the country. And, it's focused on the ground up. And it's, basically what we do is custom voter contact projects. And it's been a good run.
So walk me through kind of what you guys do. So I'm a candidate. I'm running for state senate here in Texas, and I know that I need a really strong ground game. And I come to you and say, Dan, I need your help. What does that kind of look like? Just the rough strokes.
Well, let me back up for a minute and just say this: a lot of campaigns get really noisy. I got to have a website. I got to have a campaign manager. I've got to raise dollars. And while all those things are super important, at the end of the day, you've got to have a strategy that drives those tactical maneuvers.
Yes.
And so, we've developed a kind of a process we call the pathway to victory formula. Some people have called this the Abe Lincoln 4-step. I don't know if you've ever heard this, but if you've been to any of campaign trainings, they use that quote from Abraham Lincoln back in 1840s, where he said, it was a letter that he wrote to political operatives in the Whig Party, and I think he was running for Congress at the time. And he wrote the letter, and it basically said, obtain a complete list of all the voters, ascertain with certainty for whom they will vote, have the undecided spoken to by those in whom they have the most confidence, and then on election day, make sure every Whig gets to the polls. Now, if you can see through the 1840 syntax, the principles that Abe Lincoln lays out in that letter are precisely the strategic element that we try to use in campaigns today. And that's, what we call the political, the pathway to victory formula is 4 steps. You build a target universe of voters under the theory that not everybody's going to vote. So you want to focus on the people that are likely to vote. So the first step is build a target universe of voters. The second thing is you need to identify voter preferences. Now, it costs a lot of money to run campaigns. It takes a lot of people to run campaigns. And so with limited resources, you need to focus the right message to the right voter at the right time. Doesn't always work that neatly, but to the extent that you can segment your voters, there's 3 buckets basically. Their voters are either for you, they're against you, or they're undecided. And so as you segment your voters, then that allows your campaign with finite resources to target most of the resources to persuading undecided voters. And as you're persuading, you're also identifying to see if you're moving voters so that you can move supporters into the next step, which is turning out your supporters on election day. A lot of people have this magnanimous view towards election day, and they want to, see this great increase in voter turnout. Well, if you're a candidate, I want that turnout to be about my identified supporters. So I don't want to turn out my opponent's supporters. I want to turn out my identified supporters. So again, those 4 steps are build a target universe, identify voter preferences, so you can segment your voters, persuade your undecideds, and turn out your supporters. That is the framework that we start every candidate with, so that it gives them a framework for everything else. Think about it from a practical standpoint. When you start going door to door, you're not going to knock on every door. So if you've built that targeted universe, you know who you're going to and why you're going to their house. Exactly. This is a Republican primary voter who's turned out 3 of the last 4 times. He's likely to turn out. I got to get my message out to him.
Yeah, he's going to vote. The only question is whether he's going to vote for your guy.
Right. But, there's a lot of people that don't understand that, and they think, well, I don't want to walk to 3 houses on this street and then go the next street over and knock on 10 and then move one street. And they don't understand it. I just think it would be easier to go down to every door down the neighborhood. It would just be more efficient. And what they don't understand is they're going to get to 1 street instead of 10 streets. And, they run out of time to be able to do what they want to do. But if you have that framework in place, then you can start putting a campaign blueprint together that, your canvassing and your door-to-door program all of a sudden has a purpose to fit in that framework. And then your mail and your phones and all the other, accoutrements that campaigns like to do, they have a purpose and they have a reason for existing. They exist to help you achieve that 4-step framework. And so, what we try to do is, as we meet with candidates or, independent expenditure organizations, is we help them focus on that framework and then look for products and services that will help them achieve that. That's a long answer to your short question.
No, that's a really good explanation of what you got to do, because much like I kind of visualize kind of like a food pyramid type situation with that. You got that pyramid diagram, and your ground game and that core understanding of that 4-step process is what starts it off, and you can't build up from there. You're not going to know how to leverage your TV or radio, or who to target with your mail, or who to call, or who to invite to events or ask for money, unless you understand what your interested target universe is, what their issues they care about are, who your undecideds and who your favorables are. I mean, that's, and it always, I love it as somebody that, loves ground game so much that fundamentally the process has not changed that much since the days of the Roman Senate or Abe Lincoln, right? I mean, it's really cool. And it's because as long as there are voters, and in spite of all the folks who talk about how social media or, hyper-targeted consumer data are going to change the world and knock out the block walking, I always tell folks, look, it's been this way since the days of the Roman Senate. Not much changes when it comes to how people work at their core. And there's always going to be an element where you've got to go talk to individual voters, shake their hand, look them in the eye, understand what they believe, and ask for their support. And then, of course, you got to make sure they turn out on Election Day. So these fundamentals, they haven't changed in a couple thousand years. They're not going to change anytime soon. So every candidate gets to make the decision at their own peril whether or not they're going to leverage an understanding of these tactics.
Right. Well, and I think on a practical level too, as most campaigns don't have the money to pay high-priced consultants to, think up all this stuff for them. So this 4-step framework, which has been around for the ages, if campaigns will, sit down at the kitchen table and understand these principles, then that allows them to be grounded so that when they're making decisions on products and services, they can save a lot of money. They don't have to pay a big fancy consultant to, think these big thoughts for them. I mean, they're just recreating the wheel for this candidate. So, for most candidates, if they will understand this framework, then they can start being more selective with the products they choose. And they don't have to worry about, a mail consultant that comes in and does a district-wide mailing to every single voter.
Yes.
And it's not householded either. I mean, when you do your phone programs and, all the other, programs, if you understand the principle of targeting, it allows you to save thousands and thousands of dollars on campaign expenditures, and make better decisions. And it's amazing. Businesses, PACs, campaigns, the amount of money that they waste because they don't think through the framework and they don't think through your bottom line strategies of what you're trying to accomplish. So,
well, each of those 4 steps, those 4 parts of the campaign have infinite levels of complexity and cost that you can associate with them, right? I mean, and it depends on your campaign budget, your size, your need, and frankly, the sophistication of your opponent, which of them you might choose. So I can go down to the county in most cases, and for a couple bucks, I can buy all the registered voters with voting history. That's probably for 90% of campaigns or more, that's all the sophistication I need, based on where they live and how likely they are to vote based on past voting patterns. But I can go buy hundreds, if not thousands, of points of consumer data and pay people to run all kinds of analytical breakdowns of the types of voters and propensities for different types of beliefs and activities. Well, for most people, that's there's no reason, because they're not going to use that. So I always tell campaigns, start out with making sure that you have a reasonable program for each of those 4 sections. From there, if you've got money to hire somebody to go over your data, or to add more data points, or to do extra block walking, or help consult with you, that's great. But make sure, first of all, you can afford it without cannibalizing other important parts of your campaign. And 2, make sure you have a plan for how you're going to use the information that you get, because most people, when they ask me about, say, hey, I want to buy a bunch of this other consumer data, one, they don't understand what they might want to actually buy. They just, hear consumer data and think it's going to help with targeting. But 2, even if I give them the right kinds of data, they don't know how to use it. And so make sure you understand how that's going to improve your campaign before you ever start trying to buy that, or figure out what the costs are going to be, because otherwise you're wasting money you could otherwise put towards mail, or hiring block walkers, or doing more events, or something that could actually move the needle in your favor.
Right. Well, a lot of times we try to get, the consulting class, a lot of times tries to bring an aura of sophistication to the process, to justify their big fees. And, what I would say to you is, if you're a state house candidate and you go grab your voter file and, you build a targeted universe from your voter file, whether you have 1,500 data points in addition to the voting history, if you have their basic data plus their voting history, and you build a targeted universe from that, in my opinion, that's a targeted, data-driven campaign. Now, you don't have to have 1,500 data points to say you're running a targeted, data-driven campaign. If you're targeting and you're looking at past history and you're using those data points, those simple data points, to drive your conversations with people, that's as sophisticated as you need to be. When you get into tight races, into, where you're winning on the margins, that's, and it's, maybe a congressional race or a state Senate race and up, then you can get into more of the data analytics, but I think it's overused most of the time.
Well, and a lot of times it's an excuse, or becomes an excuse to be paralyzed by analysis. Because, look, I don't care how sophisticated you want to get somebody in the field. Figure out the bare minimum and start getting out there and identifying what people care about. You can refine your target universe with the software, through Campaign Sidekick or others that's out there. You can refine your survey and your target universe on the fly. So don't get so focused on the perfect strategy that you don't actually go talk to people. And it's like, look, just get somebody in the field as soon as possible and start asking questions of a reasonable target of voters. And from there, we can tweak the sophistication or add layers of complexity to this. But at its core, you've got to talk to a lot of voters between now and Election Day. And generally, time being the one campaign asset you can't get more of, you really got to make sure you're not wasting it.
That's right. I agree 100%.
So you guys focus on the ground game, building that from literally the ground up. You guys do bring in walkers. You help design the whole program. Nuts to bolts. Depending on whatever a campaign needs. As you said, that's different for everybody. What are some of the things that you guys have done that have really set you guys apart?
Well, I mean, as you know, there are not many of us ground game focused, firms out there. So I think that's been the primary differentiator for me, for you, is the fact that we believe in the ground, and that's kind of the essence of our branding. I think one of the other things that sets us apart and has allowed me, in the business world to be successful is incorporating and leveraging ground game with digital strategies. When I first started, when I first left the legislature and started working for this organization and moving around the country, it was the early 2000s, and so you didn't have the digital sophistication that you have now. So we used to call the people that wanted to just work on the computers slacktivist.
Right.
Because they felt like they could make as much impact, on doing Facebook posts and doing Facebook invitations to events and things like. And back then, they didn't have the sophisticating and targeting abilities that that you have now. So, I used to be a little bit opposed to the digital, versus ground game, paradigm. But now, with the abilities to target and to, deliver messages, I think that you can use digital to leverage your ground game. You can use ground game to help, people engage in your digital efforts. And so, marrying up those two aspects of politics, I think for me has been something that I've been able to use and be adept at. So, I mean, like I'll tell you one of the things that we worked on with Cruise, on the Cruise Pack, didn't get it to the level that I wanted to, but when I first ran for the House back in 1994, a week before I would go out on the door, knock on doors, I would send a piece of direct mail. It was a 1-page, 8.5 by 11 letter in a envelope, and it had a picture of me walking, and it said, "I'm coming to your house. I want to talk to you." It was just kind of an introduction piece.
Yeah.
And so when I would come to the doorstep, a lot of people would say, "Wow, I can't believe you actually came." And then after I left, if I talked to them, I kept good notes. And so after I got home, I would send a follow-up letter. If I talked to them, I'd do a handwritten PS and say, that was a nice garden you had in the yard, or, something that kind of tied, back to our conversation.
Right.
And if they weren't there, then I left a "sorry I missed you," letter for them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when we were on the Cruise campaign, I started talking to the digital people about whether it would be possible to have that same type of regimen, except digital.
Right.
Because now with digital targeting, you can take a voter file and match it up to IP address, and so you can do those same things. In the time prior to knocking on doors, you can hit their households with banner ads that say, "Coming to your doorstep." And when you get there, you can tag them, and after the fact send either "sorry I missed you" banner ads or "nice to meet you" banner ads. I mean, you can't put "nice garden," comments
Yeah.
in banner advertising, but those targeting capabilities with digital advertising and digital, social media accounts can really leverage your ground game activities. So I think that's one of the things that we've tried to do to differentiate ourselves.
Well, it's really important trying to marry those up from the ground game perspective, I think, because there's a lot of folks that are digital vendors that will talk about how they can marry it with your with your ground game, and many of them I'm sure do an awesome job. But I think there's a difference in perspective because if they don't have that background and understanding the core purpose and how you actually build and execute a ground game campaign, it's going to be harder for them to effectively marry that. But from y'all's perspective, with your genius and background being on the ground game side, I think it's a lot easier to say, look, the social media side is supposed to augment our force when it comes to the ground game. It's a component of it, not the full or the main set piece. And so so it's going to serve the ground game, and you can use it to, like I said, augment that personal contact any way you want. And I love what you're talking about as far as what you did on the campaign trail, because two of the things that most people would list in their top complaints about politicians are they don't keep their promises and they don't care about the little people, right? And they sure don't pay attention. And so in that sequence you described, first of all, you make a promise. It's a very elementary one. You follow through on it, so you've already proven you keep your promises. And then you follow up to let them know that you care about what they care about and you remember who they are and what you talked about. And so in that sequence, even though they're small things, they signal to that person as you're getting to know them a little bit that you keep your promises and somebody has follow through. And that makes an outsized impact when you're talking about those voter interactions.
Well, not only that, but if you follow that type of system when you're going door to door as a candidate, your name ID will skyrocket.
Oh, yeah.
Because what happens is they see your mail prior to and after, and they see you on the doorstep with your door. They've seen your name probably 10 times by the time you get through that whole sequence. But then they're so impressed by it, they start talking to their neighbors and they start talking to their, friends around, that live on the other side of the city, and you get this whole whisper and this, this echo chamber going, which just does wonders for your name ID. So that's practical tip there.
Oh, you're absolutely right. So let's go back to talk about your initial time as a candidate. So you'd spent a lot of time on the campaign trails, 6 or so years before you decided to run yourself. You had the background in the sales and experience. When you started building your campaign plan and decided, hey, I think I'm going to do this, what were some of those initial steps that you took that you felt were really important to getting your campaign started right?
I think, back when I first ran, and just give you another little tidbit about the campaign, I ran against a Republican, a mayor of the town that I lived in the Republican primary, and then ran against another former mayor in the general election. So Republican mayor and a Democrat mayor who I ran against. And, I was 23, 24 at the time. I had no money. All I had was shoe leather. And so, my singular focus was not, back then you were just getting the internet, so no such thing as a campaign website. So, I didn't have that. I didn't worry about that. My singular focus was on how can I take 4 or 5 decent pictures of me and my family so I can put together a good, palm card literature piece. The second thing that I worried over was how can I put together this 1-page letter and make sure it gets out to the right people, and then the follow-up sequence after that. And then the third thing was how do I, budget my time so that I can get out and go door to door every day possible. I didn't knock on Sunday. So 6 days a week I was out there doing. And so, back then, life was very simple, and I raised $1,200 that primary campaign, and my opponent spent $25,000. I think I went through two or three pairs of shoes, so life was simple. So I guess 1994 wasn't that long ago, so you can't say I'm an old fart. I'm not that old. But I think there's a lesson to be learned, and that is, focus on the fundamentals, and find other people to help you worry about the other details. I had another funny story about my campaign. My brother was my campaign manager. He's 4 years younger than me. And a lot of times he would get out and go door to door too, and they thought he was me. He thought my brother was me, and so we kind of got to double our candidate, quote unquote, door time. But anyway, I think it's real easy to get caught up in the noise and the drama of campaigns. If you're the candidate, find a trusted advisor. It doesn't have to be some high paid consultant. Find a trusted advisor, a wife, a business partner, somebody that can help you manage the campaign so you can just focus on, the fundamentals. And that's meeting people and the process around that.
Yeah, asking for votes and asking for dollars. The donors and voters, those are your two jobs as a candidate. And I always kind of tell folks as a general rule, look, if 90% of your campaign focused time is not going to those two silos, then you need to really review some things. There's some inevitable admin time that's going to be taken up there in meetings and stuff, but the vast majority of your time needs to go directly to talking to voters and donors, whether it's on the phone, at the door, at events, or talking to donors in their homes or wherever you can find them. That's your core job, because those are two things that you can leverage that you can't delegate, or at least the quality of interaction. There's certain folks, and when it comes to asking for money, there's nobody better. When it comes to asking for votes, there's nobody better than you because you're the guy. A lot of the other stuff, cut and walk list, proof in Facebook ads, drafting mail pieces, you can all delegate that. And in some cases, if you're running a low budget, you may have to have your fingers a little bit more in that pie. But make sure you're maximizing that time at the door and talking to donors. That's just critical.
Right. That's right. And, I did, meetings with the local party officials, and, I would spend time talking to, I'd stop by and meet with community leaders and things like that. But, my singular focus in that campaign was getting out on doorsteps.
Now, so you obviously won that first campaign against those two mayors, which going up against two guys with a lot higher name ID and obviously a lot more money, that's not an easy thing in itself. Right. So that's impressive. And I would imagine that did you have campaigns, you didn't run always uncontested from that point. How did things change in the future?
Yeah, it was, my district was a pretty solid Republican district. I had a Democrat, run against me. I was there for 6 elections. And I had one Democrat ran against me, and then I had a Republican my last 2-year term. I had a Republican county councilman run against me, and I'd been in office for 12 years. I felt like I was pretty available, and I always walked on doorsteps throughout the cycle. And so, I remember vividly when I decided to run again, that, I made a commitment that, I'm gonna go down to the State House every day, do my job, and then head back to the district as quickly as I can. I was about an hour away from the Capitol. And so every afternoon I was back knocking on doors, and that was the thing that helped me in my primary. I think I got 59% of the vote that election, and that was the lowest I ever got. But that didn't have a lot of opposition, but when I did, they were pretty intense. I was a firebrand, and so it was easy to dislike me if you wanted to.
It'll definitely galvanize both your support and resistance.
Right.
And right. Winning with 59% as your low watermark is not bad, Dan. Not bad at all. I'd be pretty happy with that one.
Right.
So when you're looking at building campaigns, both from the consulting side as well as with your background as a candidate, one of the critical parts of being able to delegate so many of those responsibilities we talked about is really the quality of your team. And you can have, as you mentioned, it's important to have trusted advisors, whether they're paid or just people who can tell you to pull your head out of your butt because they know you well enough. So from your wife to your kitchen cabinet. But picking your staff, if you're in a campaign we were hiring, whether it's interns or paid staff and managers, what are some of the things that you look for when you're trying to identify those people and as you're interviewing them?
From a staffing perspective, I think the first rule for me is the candidate is not the campaign manager, and that's a little bit off topic from what you're talking about. But if you start with that premise, then I think it makes things a lot easier. Everybody understands that and can hold everybody accountable for that. The second thing is you've got to sit down. You know, there's a tendency in campaigns to build the car while it's going 60 miles an hour down the highway, and so what you've got to do before you get up to the 60-mile-an-hour mark is you've got to sit down and say, okay, I've got my strategic 4-step framework in place, and kind of have my roadmap now. Based on the level of campaign that I'm in, what do I need, from a labor perspective? And you need a campaign manager. If it's a small house race, that campaign manager can be, the fundraiser and the press agent, the press, person, all in one, and maybe just have a few volunteer people to fill in the gaps. But when you start getting into bigger races, you've got more of a division of labor. But the bottom line is you got to sit down and say, okay, what are the main functions that I need to fill in my campaign? And then, like Dave Ramsey, one of my, folks that I follow, sit down and write a job description.
Right.
Because then it gives you clarity on, what you need to hire. And it also gives the person that you're hiring clarity on what they're supposed to be doing. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's something that's really missing a lot of times. And it's pretty simple if you just take the time to do it. Sit down and make a simple job description so you can hold folks accountable. And then, as Dave Ramsey also says, hire slow and fire fast. You need to take the time, and there's so much drama in campaigns, and I think the primary reason is, people do the opposite. You hire fast and fire slow.
Oh yes.
And it's I mean, I'm still waiting to implement one of the rules that Dave Ramsey talks about, and that's the no gossip rule. I mean, because that's one of the things that just eats a campaign up. And so I'm trying to figure out how to bring that into the campaign world. But
I don't know how you do that one without firing everybody.
I know. It'd be a pretty lean staff. But
it would. That'd be great, but there'd only be like 2 of them.
Yeah, right. But, I mean, some of those basic business principles that are common sense, I think you've got to bring those into the campaign structure. And try to a lot of times when you get into a small town situation, you may not have a big labor pool to draw from. I mean, that's one of the challenges of small campaigns. But the good thing about smaller campaigns is you don't need as many people, so it's kind of a balancing act that you just got to be smart about.
You're absolutely right. I'm a big fan of trying to make sure that even in those small races, even when you've got a smaller labor pool, hopefully you have stronger relationships, and so you're able to have more people that, while they may not be a normal party guy that goes out block walking, they're going to be somebody that cares specifically about you and is willing to do real things to help you.
Right. And I think in a small town situation like that too, one of the things that you can that you should strive to do is find ways to train and upgrade people's skills. I mean, it's amazing the number of people that I do some training for Leadership Institute. I know you got American Majority, I think it is, out there. You've got a bunch of other groups, but to the extent that you can put people through some of these political training boot camps, it helps them understand what you're trying to accomplish in the campaign. It helps upgrade their skills, and it's a way of investing back to them.
Right.
And then the other thing I would say that's super important is making sure that you genuinely thank people for their time. I mean,
Yes.
if you will take the time to appreciate people's time and the resources they invest in your campaign, a lot of times it's more about being recognized and thanked than it is, whatever you could pay them.
Mm-hmm.
They want to be recognized.
Right.
So some of those practical things I think are things that can help build your team.
Well, and one of the things you mentioned is the perennial problem of having people build their campaign once they're going 60 miles an hour. And part of why I started My Campaign Coach, and with my background training candidates, part of why we started this was because so much of the important things about campaigns, you can really plan a lot of that before you ever pull the trigger or have an announcement.
Right.
You can figure out how you're going to train your people. You can build the logistical framework and figure out how we're going to make decisions within the campaign, write those job descriptions, etc. And it's kind of looking at like an 80-20 rule kind of situation. It takes 20% of the time to learn 80% of the stuff.
Right.
And so much of the campaign specific stuff, you have to get into the race and really understand the specifics of it to really generate the final product. But there's a lot of stuff that really, the stuff that honestly messes up most campaigns is stuff you could, if not should have done before you put your website up and made your initial announcement.
Right.
It's simple stuff. It may not always be easy, but it's simple. And if you put that pre-work in, you can lower your blood pressure and save yourself so many headaches down the line.
Right. Well, it's kind of funny because this isn't just a small campaign mistake. I mean, in some of the biggest campaigns I've ever worked in, and not just on the campaign side, but the independent expenditure side. And I'm not talking about, the project we worked on together, because I thought they were pretty methodical, but some of these big operations that I've worked in, they are notorious for, shoot then aim later. And it's just, one of those things that if you can spend a little bit of time thinking through your process, it'll pay dividends. So
you're 100% correct. Well, Dan, I really appreciate you being on with us today, and would definitely like to have you back on sometime when we get a little bit closer to the primaries coming up, because I'd love to get your advice for how people can use their ground game, especially when so much is being talked about with President Trump being elected, how that has changed or obliterated some of the need for that with all the heavy media coverage.
Right.
But what are some closing tips that you've got that the candidates should be leveraging as they're looking at running this election cycle?
I feel like you've sucked everything out of my head. I'm having to think here for a minute.
There's more in there.
Yeah, right. I think what we just talked about, planning, is so crucial. The old adage, if you fail to plan, you're planning to fail.
Yes, sir.
And do your framework, understand your framework, sit down and put together your plan based on that framework, and then have a budget. We didn't spend a lot of time talking about that, but everything that you do in a campaign costs something, so you need to think through that cost so that you can make good allocations of funds that you raise. I don't know.
I think that's solid. That's good advice. Where can folks find you online if they want to follow more what you're doing or reach out for information on how you guys can help their campaign?
I'm on Facebook, Ground Game Strategies, facebook.com/Ground Game Strategies, and then my website is groundgamehq.com. And happy to talk to anybody. Pick my brain, and I'm passionate about campaigns from the ground up. So if you're interested in that, I'd love to talk to you.
Perfect. Well, Dan, thank you again for coming on with us, and best of luck with your bride and the baby coming on the way. I know you're going to have to give me a call if you learn any of this more parenting stuff to share between when yours shows up and when mine shows up in October.
That's right. Congratulations to you and your wife.
I appreciate it. Well, you have a wonderful day. Listeners, thank you all very much for tuning in again this week, and we'll talk to you again next week with the next episode.
Please subscribe and rate us on iTunes to help spread the word. We'll be back with you next week with more campaign insights from My Campaign Coach.